Still sinking, the Tyrannosaurus had to struggle to keep its huge head only a few feet above water. Insane with rage, it lashed its tail wildly in an attempt to free one of its hind legs. Then, all at once, it stopped and stared out to sea. From the dark waters, a great dorsal fin was approaching, slicing through the fog. The T-Rex cocked its head and stood perfectly still, instincts telling it that it had wandered into the domain of a superior hunter.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and welcome to Kaiju Lit Circle. Today's novel takes us to the deepest depths of the ocean and makes the water terrifying once again. Join me as we dive headfirst into MEG, a novel of deep sea terror.
Jonas Taylor has had a rough go of things lately. It all began a few years ago, when he was discharged from the US Navy with a bill of insanity over an incident in the Mariana Trench, an event which wrecked a submersible and killed 2 men. Despite the official diagnosis, Jonas believes that the incident was not his fault, but the fault of a living megalodon shark which attacked the vessel. As such, he spent his life since then as somewhat of a cryptozoologist trying to prove it. Sadly, all these years later, he has no proof, his reputation remains in shambles, and his wife is clearly cheating on him. When the Tanaka Oceanographic Institute approaches him to supervise an investigation of damaged equipment in the trench, he sees an opportunity to finally prove his theory. Jonas is right, of course. There really are megalodons still living in the frigid waters of the trench, and a series of unfortunate events allows a pregnant female to escape into the warmer oceans of the Pacific, where she has no competition for the role of apex predator.
I feel I ought to mention that I'm not reading from the original 1997 version of MEG, but rather the revised and expanded edition published in 2015, which includes the short prequel MEG Origins. So if any excerpts sound unfamiliar, that's why. Based on what I understand, though, it's still the same story, so how is it?
The primary hurdle MEG must overcome to succeed is that it must be more than just Peter Benchley's Jaws with a bigger shark. Since Jaws is the gold standard for shark attack stories, that's no easy feat, but I'm pleased to say that MEG pulls it off expertly.
Steve Alton realized that his monster needed to be more than just a really big shark. Yes, there are some similarities between a megalodon and a great white, such as stealth factor and ravenous appetite, but the differences are significant.
The MEG, for example, is pure white from nose to tail, allowing for lots of opportunities to describe it in creative ways such as these. Maggie was levitating along the side of the boat as if possessed, her body rising above the mahogany rail, followed by the megalodon's ghostly white head right beneath her.
Also, the MEG is nocturnal, since living in the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean has made its eyes sensitive to light. This provides the humans with a temporary advantage. But I won't spoil why it's temporary.
The greater size allows the MEG more creative ways to make a kill than just having people vanish beneath the surface in a fountain of blood, as so many shark movies do. The image on the cover? That happens in the book, and it's every bit as epic as you'd want it to be.
Speaking of pictures, that's something else MEG does differently from the books we've seen so far.
Every so often, a photoshopped image of what's occurring is inserted between paragraphs. Now, they aren't stellar pieces of photo manipulation, and they aren't really necessary. Thanks to their placement, though, they add an extra punch to what's being described, and serve as reminders of just how incredibly huge the MEG is. In a way, the pictures make the book a bit more cinematic.
Also setting the book apart is how the human cast is handled. Unlike Jaws, which eventually narrowed its focus down to a few characters, MEG has quite an extensive cast, not all of whom make it to the end.
As characters go, they aren't that complex. Jonas Taylor is the most developed of the bunch, since he's our protagonist and has a personal history with megalodons. The others are more basic. Masao Tanaka, head of the Tanaka Oceanographic Institute, is the wise old father figure. His daughter, Terry, has a chip on her shoulder, but her heart's in the right place. Jonas's wife, Maggie, is thoroughly unsympathetic. Mac is the crazy best friend.
Despite the straightforwardness of the archetypes, I certainly wouldn't call them bad.
In fact, given how many there are, it's a bit of a blessing that they aren't all going through boatloads of stuff in addition to catching the shark. Still, you shouldn't expect anything especially deep from these characters. As of Book 1, they're fairly one note.
Since this is the expanded version of the book, I should also draw a bit of attention to the prequel, MEG Origins.
This new edition gives us details on the incident which sent Jonas Taylor's life on a downward spiral, and while it is interesting to see it included, I do wonder if it was entirely necessary. You see, part of what works so well about the first few chapters of the original novel is how, at first, there's some ambiguity about whether Jonas really did encounter a megalodon or if he just imagined the whole thing.
Now yes, we know in the back of our minds he'll be proven right eventually, but that psychological aspect is necessary to the build-up, because we don't know Jonas's mental state going in.
Origins changes that drastically. Thanks to the prequel, the initial ambiguity is removed. We know for certain that there was a real Meg, and it was responsible for what happened, and Jonas was a scapegoat for the disaster in multiple ways. Ergo, if one reads the prequel before reading the novel proper for the first time, Jonas's initial mental struggle of whether or not he really encountered a Meg becomes somewhat tedious because we already know the answer. Ergo, if you have yet to pick up this series, I'd recommend reading MEG Origins after you've read the main story.
And indeed, MEG is a book which I highly recommend. It was a wild ride from start to finish, and I'm really looking forward to see where things go from here. After all, the prequel implies that Megs aren't the only creatures living in the Mariana Trench, nor is the trench the only place where ravenous sea monsters may dwell. But that's a review for another day. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off. Incidentally, I'm not entirely sure if I'll be reviewing Jaws for this series, since the shark, though abnormally large admittedly, is still an otherwise normal great white and therefore might not count as an actual kaiju. But you're free to cast your vote in the comments section on that matter.